guys, and welcome to another episode. Today, I am joined by a really special guest, and that is, of course, Stan Larimer from BEOS, and known as kind of the grandfather of Bitshares. Stan, once again, I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me. I was wondering if maybe we could kick this interview off by you kind of telling me a little bit about yourself, because you had a really rich history in the space as far as Dpos and a lot of these movements kind of go.
Yeah, well, I spent 36 years in the aerospace industry designing unmanned air, ground, sea, and space vehicles. And then I retired from that industry and started doing little entrepreneurial things. And then my son got this brilliant idea to build Bitshares. He called me out of retirement to run his company for him while he went off and focused on the technology. And that led to Bitshares. I've been with Bitshares ever since, even though Dan's gone on to do Steemit and now EOS. And he's always off on some new challenge, but I'm coming along sort of behind him, keeping what he built running and making it hopefully continue to be a success.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a little bit here. Obviously, you're doing some things that are very different from kind of traditional blockchains and, putting nodes in space. And of course, you're raindropping a lot of this to existing Bitshare holders, which I think is a really noble thing to do. I guess, before we kind of get too far ahead of ourselves, can you kind of explain in the simplest terms possible what exactly is BEOS and maybe a little bit of history about Bitshares?
Yeah, well, all right, let's do it in that order then. Bitshares, is the very first concept of a decentralized autonomous company. And that's something that I think I first wrote about in the fall of 2013 in my original article, Bitcoin and the Three Laws of Robotics, which talked about how you could make a robotically run company running on the blockchain. It would have a lot of the properties of a company in terms of how it was governed, and that's what we set out to build. It's gone through a couple iterations. One of the things we did very early was get rid of mining as a solution. The very first thing we did was a little thing called ProtoShares, which let people mine their original stake. And then we came around, and when we developed Bitshares, we basically did something we called an airdrop onto everybody who had that stake in what they'd mined. And so they got essentially an insta upgrade to Bitshares. And then in the process of that, we got a whole lot faster operations. Bitcoin, of course, can take hours to clear a transaction. Our very first version of Bitshares took 10 seconds, and we got it down to 3 seconds with the next version that came out a year later, which was based on graphene technology. Now, that graphene technology went on to be used in an upgraded form in Steemit, which is a social media platform that pays you. You essentially mine by publishing or curating other people's publications, and that's how you get your tokens into circulation. And then Dan since went on to develop EOS, which was, his master stroke, third time's a charm type of project, which really took off in terms of total scale to be worth billions of dollars, and that gives you smart contract capability. Well, in the process of that, we had come up with this original concept of anybody that took and developed anything on Bitshares all we asked was for people to take the code and airdrop some of their tokens back onto the holders of Bitshares who paid for the original development. And not many people have done that, although they seem to be doing it a lot more now on EOS. But EOS never share dropped on Bitshares, which kind of bothered me a lot. And I decided that we would simply take a copy of EOS, call it BEOS, which is Bitshares EOS, and give it all to Bitshares holders so that they would get some of the benefits fed back to them that they missed out on by not getting an airdrop, even though BEOS built on the Dpos technology from Bitshares. That was my way of making it up to everybody. I hope people appreciate it.
They do too. And I think that no matter what you do, some people are never going to be happy. So it's interesting because what you're basically telling me is that essentially you guys, I mean, Bitshares was kind of the evolution of DPoS, the evolution of airdrops, and the evolution of really, like, when it boils down to the nuts and bolts of it, faster transaction times, and also a lot of the, a lot of changes in the amount of energy required to actually mine and utilize cryptocurrencies, which is really innovative in itself. I think for people who might be involved in EOS, I think a lot of people are definitely aware of Bitshares and are aware of kind of the rich history of Bitshares, but you've got this coming together of these two systems. Usually when there's a symbiotic relationship, you're going to see advantages on kind of both sides of the table. What would you kind of summarize some of these symbiotic relationships to be on, in terms of some of the benefits for EOS, and then some of the benefits of BitShare holders themselves?
Yeah, well, one of the things right off the bat is that EOS is, I think, well on its way to becoming a dominant new form of internet for all types of transactions. It's now big enough that I think it actually can take its place in the world there. It runs over half of the world's transactions right now just on BEOS. And if you take all the other things that use Dpos technology, it's like 85%, which means mining has been squeezed down to less than 15% of the world's transactions are being done that way. So I think that is a big factor in what is out there that we want to move BitShares relevance onto. Well, how do we take BitShares, which is a pre-EOS blockchain, and make it be an EOS sidechain? Well, we do that by creating a copy of EOS as a sidechain and integrating it as tightly as possible with Bitshares. Now, how much of that integration will we be able to do? Well, initially, all we've done is create a manual gateway, which allows you to move tokens from Bitshares over to BEOS, and in a few months, BEOS tokens will move back to Bitshares where they can trade on its decentralized exchange. So what I'm trying to accomplish here is to make Bitshares it's already the #1 decentralized exchange out there. I want to make that relevant to the BEOS universe. And that means I want to take every type of smart coin and token that Bitshares is able to manufacture. It takes 15 minutes or so to set up your own token and have it out and trading against all the other world's tokens. I want those to be usable out across the whole EOS universe of sidechains. Well, EOS comes with cross-chain compatibility, or ability for cross-chain communication. And when that is perfected, we'll be able to take things from Bitshares across to BEOS, and from there on to EOS and other EOS compatible chains.
Yeah.
And so that means that Bitshares stays relevant to the rest of the world, because now it's the premier decentralized exchange. Of course, it doesn't have native smart contracts yet, but it will have the ability to have smart contracts execute with all of its assets over on the BEOS network.
Yeah, I didn't really list this question before we started chatting, but I think it's kind of an interesting thing. I'm really excited about IBC and EOS. And I think that as we move IBC from EOS to some of these other chains, including Bitshares, there's a whole lot of tribalism out there. My blockchain is the best, this is the way to go. But I really do see like a future where we have a ton of applications, and a blockchain is kind of in a simplified form. It really is just a database, a bunch of applications that are going to draw from all of these databases and communicate with all these databases to take kind of, various things from each database to create the best and most interesting applications and most useful applications possible. Do you think that we're going to start to see some of that tribalism fade as we really start to kind of make things work through IBC, or do you think it's always going to be there?
I think it's always going to be there in some sense, because everybody has some token they've bought and they want to see go up in value, right? So anybody who's represents the chain that's competing with the chain you bought into is going to feel like they need to defend their own particular choice. And of course, there's lots of different people doing different development things. And so people tend to gravitate around different projects, and then they get locked into it. I mean, people who have mastered Bitcoin are Bitcoin maximalists because that's all they know. If they go back to some other chain, guess what? They're no longer the lords of Bitcoin. They're just ordinary schmo trying to catch up on another's chain. So once you've invested so much time learning about how to use a particular chain, it's very hard to change. On the other hand, I think EOS has gotten real traction. It's up there now with a development community second to none. It's comparable to Ethereum. And I think people who use the two systems will recognize EOS as superior in many ways. So I think it will continue to draw more and more newbies into it, and it will eventually become the de facto standard by which everything else is done. Now, that doesn't mean that something else can't come along, someone else comes along with something even better. I don't ever want to fall into the trap of claiming that anything that we've done is the best it can be. But I think EOS is in a perfect position for us to build what my ultimate objective is, which is a new world financial system independent of the one we're stuck in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you should say that. I mean, I'm kind of an optimist. Like, I would like to see this point where everything just works in synchronicity and not one particular chain wins, but digital assets and Internet 3.0 wins in general. But I think that might be a bit of a pipe dream.
It's still something that I think is worthy of hoping for. And I think that as we make the different tokens out there all interoperable, the reason for having your own separate blockchain will become far less, but you'll still have your tokens and your people who are diehard Doge fans, because of the overall meme environment of that token chain people love and will still use, but it'll just become one of many things that can trade back and forth.
Yeah, I want to dip into kind of an interesting quote that I found, of course, on the BEOS website, and it's kind of something that I've seen posted on a lot of your literature, because I did do a lot of research on Bitshares and BEOS and what you're doing before we started, and I found it really interesting. I've enjoyed 40 years developing unmanned air, ground, sea, and space systems. These days, I build unmanned companies, end quote. Where does this passion for decentralization come from? And how can it impact the average person, maybe even the average person who isn't involved in kind of a digital economy, just walking down the street? Like, what are some of the implications of what we're trying to achieve here?
Well, it probably comes from Thomas Jefferson. I'm sure it goes way back beyond him, but he was certainly an advocate of decentralization, states' rights, wanting to not have too much power in the central government. And so everything else that I've ever done has had that as a fundamental flavor of wanting to see things decentralized. We are supposed to have here in the United States 50 laboratories of democracy, 50 different states with 50 different ways people want to live, and you can move states without leaving the country and get to the set of laws you like. Well, that's kind of what Dan's idea is behind BEOS, in terms of you can define your own contract that you're willing to live under and have other people go along with that or not, but you are free and not constrained to a one-size-fits-all type of strategy.
Yeah, and it also makes it a lot more resilient. I follow, of course, Dan, like everybody else in the EOS space, and he kind of defined it as different kingdoms. That's kind of how he speaks about it. And I personally love that, little sets of kind of governance and rules all working together, but it really creates a lot of robustness for the EOS in itself, because if one of these kingdoms is not working out for you, whatever it might be, there's other options. There's, EOSIO software is out there. It's going to grow exponentially, and it's going to continue to flourish and move. And hopefully, like in a perfect world, and at least in my vision, a lot of these chains are going to work together for the greater good of that robustness and kind of create various options on other chains. I just think that there's a lot of synchronicity that can be had in between the chains if we can unite people to work together for kind of the common goal. I want to talk to you a little bit about the Bitshares Raindrop, because I think there's probably a lot of people who might not be cognizant of what exactly that's all about. If you're a Bitshares owner, you can currently claim BEOS. How exactly does this work, and why wouldn't you do a token sale?
Okay, well, we didn't do a token sale because we didn't want to be accused of being a security by the SEC. That's as simple a case as I can make it. The whole idea of EOS tokens is something that gives you essentially rights to use some of the network bandwidth. And so we're giving that away free as a free handout to people who will get two things out of it. They'll get the right to use the network, and they'll get the right to vote for who runs the network. And we wanted to give those rights to people who want to see us succeed and don't want to give those rights to people who want to see us fail. So we had to design a way of doing it that only people who cared enough to take their Bitshares tokens and move them across to the BEOS blockchain where they could collect coins. If you're willing to do that, if you're willing to trust us with your Bitshares for 3 months, then we're going to give you all the tokens that are in the network, in the public distribution. And if you aren't willing to do that for whatever reason, then obviously you don't deserve any of our tokens. You're not supporting us. So, you know, it was a way of testing and allowing people to make a choice. And of course, the reason we had people demonstrate that choice by moving their tokens is because we wanted people to get used to the idea that their tokens don't have to stay on the Bitshares network. And once they've spent several months over on the BEOS network where you can transfer them for free, you know, a lot of people may leave some of those tokens over there. And that'll be a good training ground for moving all kinds of other tokens over there. And of course, initially we only used 2 tokens, Bitshares and brownie points, which was a little example system Dan created a long time ago to demonstrate user-issued assets. He created one called brownie points, which he just gave out to people for free for doing things that he appreciated, whatever they might have done to help. And so there's a lot of those floating around out there that, you know, really didn't have much value, but now it has value because you can get for every brownie point, you can get the same thing you can get for a Bitshare. So I guess brownie points are pretty close to worth what a Bitshare is now. And either one of those is enough to get people experience with using the new network, which is what we were wanting. We wanted people to have a reason to download the wallet and to move their tokens over to the new network and to get then tokens on that network that way.
I feel like a lot of times it doesn't matter what you do. If you do the right thing and you try to redistribute a new chain or a new project, you know, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. But I'm personally really excited about BEOS, and I'm looking forward to seeing the new chain launch. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why. But to give anybody who might not be super familiar with Bitshares a sense of kind of some of the things that are happening over on that chain that might be really interesting on the BEOS chain, what are some of kind of your favorite projects right now on Bitshares?
Well, I think by far the most significant one would be Quintric, Quintric.com. It's a gold-backed token. It's gold-backed legal tender token. That means that, you know, for every 1,000 of these things called quints, you is backed by an ounce of gold from the U.S. Mint. And that is U.S. legal tender, and legal tender in the state of Utah. And that is something that now you can pass around and spend. It's more stable than anything else, and it's 100% backed by gold in a vault that you can actually look at the video from the vault and see the gold in there and see that it hasn't moved. So that type of development, I think, is huge in terms of putting something out there that I think will catch on and give people a stable currency. Unlike Tether, which is probably not backed by anything, you know, it's almost an outrage, but it's really successful. Why is that? Because people need something stable to move in and out of, and they can pretend that it's backed by real dollars in a real bank. And as long as Tether makes that trade, I guess it's working for people. But it's so much better to be backed by a solid legal tender currency. And so that to me is, I think, the biggest thing. We're going to make those quints portable onto the new BEOS network as well. So there'll be another token that will be common there. There'll probably be other things, I think, on the Bitshares networks. The bit assets are things that are very good in terms of tracking dollars or CNY or euros or whatever, backed by equity in the Bitshares network by the BTS itself. So that's another way of doing business. I think we'll probably make them portable across onto the new network as well. So those are some of the big things. We have quite a few other projects that are coming in on the BEOS network, but even these, every single one of these will still be generated as a token on the Bitshares network and then moved to the BEOS network. So in that sense, Bitshares will be heavily participating in a lot of these things. Sovereign Sky is something that is going to be raising money under a full-up SEC-approved Reg A plus type fundraiser, and it will be raising money to put nodes in space, which once that happens, will ideally be able to move the entire network up into orbit, and now it'll be operating in international space, never touching the Earth, except when it talks to directly to citizens. And so that's one application. Ruan is another one. You can find out about it at ruan.io. The other one was sovereignsky.com. Ruan.io is a social media application developed. It runs on a cell phone and gives people basically all the features that you would get on all the different social media platforms. Both of these are designed to end global poverty by projecting aid and support down to all kinds of third world countries, getting them out into the mainstream. Why are third world countries? Because they're not on the mainline channels of commerce. Therefore, they can't gain the kind of prosperity that you get if you're sitting at a crossroads of civilization. So when we put this network in orbit and make those type of financial services available to everybody, whether it's in the middle of the Congo of Africa or in the Amazon Valley or wherever else around the world, people don't have direct access, we can make a difference. And then one of the other ones is a company called Ubiquitous. You can find out about it at ubiquitous.io. It does 3D printing, and it's designed so that people can put their 3D printing blueprints on the blockchain and make them available to anybody who wants to print anything anywhere in the world. And that allows people in all of these out-of-the-way places to participate in an economy by downloading products from other people, and they can even invent their own products. And people can manage and modify one person's intellectual property and extend it, and then the blockchain will keep track of how to split up the profits between the two people who contributed to the design, the original designer and the person that added value. So that's another of the big things. And then I guess the fourth and perhaps most exciting is a series of 4 space telescopes that we're putting up with Mission Space.1. And these telescopes will be probably 100 times more powerful than what the average earthbound astronomer has available to them. When you think about, the average person might have a 6-inch reflector telescope that they're looking at, the average amateur astronomer. This telescope will be 4 or 5 times bigger diameter. That means, it's 100 times more powerful in light gathering capability, and it'll be out in space, which makes it another 10 times more effective. So you're talking about really powerful telescopes. Half of the time will be reserved for ordinary people to book books on using cryptocurrency. And we will be putting some of our BEOS nodes onto each of those 4 telescopes so that they have the dual benefit of helping to run the network from space.
Now, I want to just retrace back there a little bit. The 3D printing thing sounds absolutely amazing, as does kind of the gold-backed tokens. But the thing that really made me take a double look at what you're doing was sovereign skies, because I'm just going to be perfectly frank here. If it was anybody else who told me, hey, I'm going to throw some nodes in space, I'd call BS. But knowing your background and knowing your rich history in the space and some of the things that you've done, I believe you. But I think even more important than putting these nodes in space is maybe talking a little bit about why exactly, how is this beneficial? I understand it's also plausible to perhaps put some into international waters. Why are we putting nodes in space? What is this accomplishing?
Well, we want to put things where they cannot be overregulated, okay? Regulators are out to squelch our whole industry. And, they're doing it, one, one case at a time, but we wanted to have the ability for people to do transactions with freedom and freedom from regulation. Well, if something happens in most of the major countries of the world, there are 100 different regulations. Inside the United States money transmission laws, you got to have a money transmission license from every single state that your money passes through, and that gets prohibitively expensive for a new business, a new startup to do, which keeps all of the financial transactions in the hands of the big guys who have not been good custodians of that power. And so we're looking for ways of finding places where people can do financial transactions where they are free of regulation as much as possible. Now, international waters is a famous place. If you are familiar with cruise ships, you know that every cruise ship has a casino on it that is up and busy and running all the time when it's at sea and shuts down when it pulls into a port. Because when it pulls into the port, inside the 12-mile limit, it is subject to regulation, and so they turn them off. But when they're out in the high seas, they're free to operate without regulation. And people who may come from different countries where gambling is not allowed are free to gamble when they're on the high seas. Okay, so why can't that same philosophy be used to a blockchain which only does transactions, only signs blocks whenever it's on a node that is in international waters or ultimately international space?
Do you worry about repercussions for any of this? Because the truth of the matter is that when you create the system, if it becomes successful, it's also going to be very disruptive to a lot of people who have been, as you said, kind of the custodians of a lot of the power and a lot of the money. Do you worry about any consequences from any of this?
Oh yeah, I worry about it all the time. We can only live to the extent that we live under the rule of law, and we can only protect ourselves by wrapping ourselves in the places where law says we have freedom still. You've got Las Vegas where you can still go gambling, okay? Why is it that Nevada has special privileges that aren't present in other states? No, it's because that state government decided it was going to have that, and it's tolerated by the US government. So there are places in the world where you can do all kinds of things that are normally restricted. And we're looking to see if we can't carve out places in the world where you can engage in financial transactions or any type of transaction without fear of being overrun. Now, obviously, people will test that. And one of the things that we have done with the BEOS system is set aside 2/7 of the BEOS tokens to provide a war chest for going to war on legal battles. And so, that will be the place. If they want to come after us after we're up and running, then they'll have to face the fact that we will come after them with our full legal efforts.
I love it. It's creating a pretty, it's doing something really groundbreaking, something very kind of a little bit against the grain, but it sounds like you've already thought it through and you're pretty prepared for it. A lot of the stuff that you're working on right now is potentially very life-changing and has some really interesting kind of socio-economic impacts, I guess. And I suspect that you will succeed. I want you to succeed. And I think that nobody is better slated other than yourself to be able to make this successful. But you're going to leave a little bit of a legacy behind. How would you want people to remember you in the future, Stan? When, you know what I mean? Maybe in 100 years, when people talk about Stan Larimer, how do you want to be remembered? And what do you want to be remembered for? What would you like to hear the echoes as you're kind of cruising the halls whether it's
I would like to have Stan Larimer not be remembered at all. Give all the glory to God, because that's what I'm doing this for, to protect humanity from what the Bible tells us is a one world government that will not allow any of us to buy or sell without taking the mark of the beast, which is this final global empire. So the Bible doesn't say it's not possible to build an alternative to that empire for people. I want to build that and give the glory to God, and I don't care if I'm remembered at all.
I love it. The mark of the beast. I'm actually quite familiar, and I've watched a lot of information on that. You know, we've got people being chipped in their fingers in a large part of the world for financial transactions. We have somebody who I'm very impressed by Elon Musk, who's currently says that within the next decade, we're looking at brain chip implementation, which will kind of bring us to the internet along with AI. Does any of that stuff scare you at this point? Do you think, what are kind of some of your thoughts on the way that technology is moving so fast?
Yeah, the whole idea of a mark on your forehead or on your right hand is that affects your ability to buy or sell in this world is, to me, a red lit flared tip off. It's exactly what was prophesied 2,000 years ago, and it's now in the point where it can happen. And it's happening right at about the 6,000 year mark, which is about the time I expect Jesus Christ to return. And so everything is coming together exactly as Bible prophecy says it will. And, I don't really expect to be able to stop it, because the Bible tells us it can't be stopped. It's going to be there, and it's going to enslave the entire planet. But some people do manage to endure to the end. How do they do that? How does anybody manage to endure to the end of this phase without the ability to buy or sell? Well, the Bible doesn't say you don't have the possibility of a BEOS network in space that is a way to bypass that. That's my hope.
I love it. I had no idea that that was a lot of your motivation behind this. So that's actually really enlightening. And I do recommend that anybody, whether you're religious or whether you're not religious, go do a little bit of research on the mark of the beast, because based on what you're saying, Stan, it seems like somebody's using perhaps some famous prophetic writings. Either it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, or somebody's using it as a playbook, because I see a lot of similarities too. So I do encourage people to go out, get informed, and I'm definitely a technologist, but I think that we need to use a certain amount of caution in the way that a lot of technologies are being implemented, or else we will lose ourselves, we will lose our individuality, and bad things can potentially happen. But maybe that's a chat for another video. Censorship resistance. So clearly of the utmost importance on the BEOS chain. Are we fighting a war against censorship today on a geopolitical spectrum? Why is that so crucial?
Well, we see that happening all the time. I'm a conservative type person, and I see conservative voices being silenced everywhere by people who claim to be open-minded and interested in freedom, and yet they try to stomp out all dissenting opinions. We saw what happened to guys like InfoWars got shut down when he was simply expressing his alternative viewpoints of the world. There are lots of cases where I see people squelched, either by regulators or by people who are running the big Google, Facebook type organizations who want to enforce their political views over top of other people. I think it's very important that we have the ability and maintain the ability for freedom of speech, freedom of expression of ideas, especially since conservative ideas are the ones that are right. And those ideas that are interested in producing socialist activities, everywhere socialism has ever been tried, it's failed, it's led to disasters like we see in Venezuela. And we need people to start thinking about personal responsibility, not entitlements. And if people can't communicate why it's important for people to accept personal responsibility and capitalistic principles, then we're going to go down the tubes of socialism, which means everybody goes to the lowest common denominator. One of the things that happened in the early days of Jamestown, the first year they settled, they didn't have enough food to eat. Why didn't they have enough food to eat? Because it was a socialist type of enterprise. Everybody got the same thing, regardless of whether they worked hard or not. The next year, they substituted capitalistic principles, and they had an abundance because people got to keep most of what they worked extra hard for. And that's the big important thing people need to understand is if people aren't incentivized to work hard, they won't. And if nobody's working hard, we won't have prosperity and we'll all suffer. There, end of preach.
I love it. No, it's great. I love it. And actually, it's kind of cool that we touched on a few of those things, because I'm very, very much aware and very much follow a lot of the things that are happening in the world in regards to that. I want to step back kind of to BEOS a little bit. How are nodes discovered? Or sorry, rather, how are nodes elected, or how is governance different on BEOS than it might be on mainnet?
Well, the biggest thing that we had to do different about it is recognize the fact that not everybody would be able to afford to put a node in space. So if we're going to put a node in space, or we're going to put nodes on cruise ships, then some central organizations got to do that, because otherwise we won't have enough of them to go around. But we wanted there still to be the benefits of Dpos, which tell us that there's, the people who own the tokens get to elect who's going to sign the blocks. And the people who sign the blocks determine what version of the software is going to get run. And if you don't like the version of the software that somebody's running, you vote them out and get someone who will run the right version you think should be run. And so that we wanted to preserve. So these nodes that we will provide in these exotic places will be up for grabs by people who basically, you're going to have to get vetted by us to be sure that you are qualified to run a node, but then you've got to get elected by the shareholders who will determine what, which node you get to run, and so on. So it will work the same as any Dpos system, but there will be that added difference that the hardware itself will be provided by our foundation.
Okay. You don't have to tell me, and this isn't anything I prepared you for, but I'm curious, like, what is the cost of sending a node into space? So I understand the utility, it makes perfect sense. How much does it really cost to launch one of these things into space? How complex is that process, and how long does that take?
Well, there's many different answers to that question because it depends on, how complex your node is. The very simple small node that we put up there already is one that we're buying from somebody who wants to use it for one purpose for 6 months and then turn it over to somebody else. So we got one on the cheap, the little BEOS NIC 1 that I talk about. I don't think it's going to have enough processing power to run a full up node, so it'll probably have to run a wallet in space and be used for distributing probably ramfall. Once we get past the 89-day period and go into the 80-week period following that, that ramfall, I hope, will be coming down from the BEOS satellite. Every time it goes past the ground station, it'll kick out some more ramfall. So, that particular satellite is probably going to cost us $1 million to buy from its owners. Then, as we start putting up our own other satellites, that probably be 10 times that to put up a powerful equatorial-based node that has the capacity and interconnectivity that we need. We're budgeting for the entire fundraising $510 million to put up the full network.
It's incredible. But some of the, exactly as we've kind of spoken about, some of the advantages of having something in an area in which no centralized kind of government has direct authority over is beautiful. So I want to ask you something a little bit, maybe a little bit more reflective. If, how close do you think we are, Stan, to full-scale adoption of digital assets, and what do you think that the future holds?
Well, I would hope that the future holds, and this is over a 10-year span, the future holds a completely autonomous, separate financial system that people can interact with that is outside the domain of the existing global financial system. So that's my long-term vision for 10 years from now. And there are many ways that might not come into existence. But I think there's a good chance at it. Of course, a lot depends on what the powers that be do to interfere with that plan. And I'm sure there are lots of things they could do. We'll have to just see how far it goes. But I do think that we are right on the tipping point of people starting to wake up and use this. I think there will be some government-sponsored versions of this digital currency. And that will make it legitimate in a lot of people's minds. And then hopefully we can move in and take the liberty-minded people's business and move it into space where they can enjoy some autonomy.
Stan, if you had one single message in kind of a short, concise sentence that you were able to share with the entire world, what would that be?
Well, being as I'm a Christian, I got to make it a Christian message because my primary job is to communicate and make disciples of all nations. And so I'm going to tell you, you've got to read the Bible and get to know Jesus Christ.
Where can people find out more about what you're doing and find out more about BEOS?
Well, I think the number one place you can go to read about what I'm doing is at steemit/@Stan, which takes you to my blog, and that's where I talk about everything that I'm involved in. So you can go back through that blog and read about everything from Sovereign Sky to Ubiquitous to Quintrig to Mission Space to Atanio, which is another type of an automated trading system. All the different things that I've worked on have articles there. And those, of course, link to the various websites where you can learn about those different systems.
I'll make sure that I put a link to that below. I'm also going to put a link to your Telegram group so that people can come in and they can find you and they can talk to you, because we covered a lot of different topics, not just about blockchain, but about different, political views and theorizing about the future. So you're an intelligent man, you're well-spoken, you've been around for a long time, you've done some incredible things. So I do recommend that people go into Telegram and go visit Stan. And if you have Bitshares, this man is giving an incredible project away for free. So I'll make sure I post a little bit of information on how you can actually claim your BEOS. Stan, I have nothing else to say to you other than thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me. It was really an honor. I appreciate you. I appreciate your project. I support it, and I can't wait to see what the future holds.
Outstanding. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Same. I'll talk to you soon, Stan. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.